In today's lesson, I'm going to give you guys some basic information or things you need to know before moving on to the other kingdoms. So without further ado, let's start. I put today's lesson in a Word document, so I kind of have to go back and forth like that, so sorry for the inconvenience. In today's lesson, we're going to be going through a table. And before that, let's go through the legend. So in the table, I use letter P to represent prokaryote, letter E to represent eukaryote, letter U to represent unicellular, and letter M to represent multicellular. And let's start with the first row of the table. We've got 3 different types of domains. And for the ones who do not know what a domain is, please check the lesson 2 and lesson 4. And I believe that I mentioned what a domain is in those previous lessons. And hopefully I can put the link of the video in the description or even in the top right corner or top left corner. But anyways, we have 3 different domains, which are bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. And we've got 6 different kingdoms. They are eubacteria, archaea, protista, fungi, plantae, and animalia. For the kingdom eubacteria, you can call it eubacteria like I show it here, or you can just simply call it bacteria. It doesn't really matter. And let's start with this column. So for the kingdom bacteria, all of them are prokaryotes, and they're unicellular, meaning that they do not have a nucleus or membrane-bound organelles, but they do have cell walls, which is made of peptidoglycan. And for the locomotion, some bacteria are able to move while others can. And for the bacteria that are able to move, they use the flagellum to move around. So it is like the tail at the end of the cell. And in terms of the mode of nutrition, some bacteria are heterotroph, meaning that they have to consume food from an outside source, while other bacteria are able to do a form of photosynthesis. The thing is, they do not contain chloroplast in their cell, which I didn't mention in the previous lesson, but they contain thylakoid membranes, which is a similar structure to chloroplast in the plants. And how do they reproduce? They can reproduce either asexually or sexually. And for the kingdom Archaea, again, they're prokaryotes and they're unicellular, which means they do not have nucleus or membrane-bound organelles. They're very similar to bacteria. However, they do not have peptidoglycan. What they have is pseudo-peptidoglycan, and pseudo means fake in this case. They do not have peptidoglycan in their cell walls. And there's no evidence that archaea are able to move. And in terms of the mode of nutrition, that is exactly same as bacteria. And for reproduction, they can only reproduce asexually, so they can reproduce either through binary fission or budding. In the lesson, I did not mention budding at all, and that is not part of grade 11 content. I want you guys to take a look at the example of archaea here. Again, in the last episode, where we talked about archaea, I gave you guys some examples of archaea, which include thermophiles, right? And methanogens, etc. And moving on to protista. All of the protista are eukaryotes. Again, I use the letter E to represent eukaryote. And they can be either unicellular or multicellular. And most of them do not have cell walls. For some protists, they're able to move. And I'm gonna cover that part in the next lesson actually. And in terms of the mode of nutrition, again, that is very similar to the bacteria and archaea. Some of the protists are autotroph while others are heterotrophs. And they can reproduce asexually or sexually. Again, I'm going to cover that part in the next lesson. Well, I used a lot of again in this lesson. And forget about examples here because we're going to be going through these examples in the next lesson. Okay, Moving on to fungi. Some people pronounce it as fungi, but most people pronounce it as fungi. And they are eukaryotes, and they can be either unicellular or multicellular. They contain cell organelles with membrane bounded. And the main component of their cell wall is called chitin. And none of the fungi that we discovered so far are able to move. So I put a none for locomotion. In terms of mode of nutrition, all of fungi are heterotrophs. They cannot do a form of photosynthesis. They do not contain thylakoid membranes or chloroplasts in their cells. All they can do is absorb food from an outside environment and go through a digestion process called extracellular digestion. And they can reproduce asexually, which include budding or spore formation or sexual reproduction. And the examples of fungi include mushrooms, like the mushroom that you eat, or the black fungi, or even molds. They're all considered fungi. Alright, what about plenty? Again, be careful of the spelling of plenty and animalia. So for the word plenty, you just put a AE at the end, and for the word animalia, you put a IA at the end. And for plenty, they're eukaryotes. Again, I use the letter E to represent eukaryotes. And all of plants or plenty kingdom are multicellular, which means they have membrane-bound organelles. And they have cell walls with cellulose. And none of the plants are able to move. All of the plants are able to perform photosynthesis because they contain chloroplast in their cells. In terms of reproduction of plants, they can reproduce either asexually or sexually. Again, we're going to be talking about that part in one of our future lessons. And the examples of plants can be mosses, ferns, or any types of flowers. And lastly, let's cover Animalia, the kingdom Animalia. And they're eukaryotes and multicellular. And the major difference between an animal cell and a plant cell, if you remember from grade 10 biology, is that animal cells do not contain cell wall. They do not have cell walls. And most of the animals are able to move. And all of them are heterotroph, meaning that they cannot produce energy on their own. They have to consume food from an outside source. And speaking of the reproduction, most of them reproduce sexually. And there are two types of sex reproduction, which are internal and external fertilization. Well, that is the end of the lesson. I hope the video can consolidate your understanding of bacteria and archaea will prepare you for our future content. And I'll see you in the next episode.